The biggest difference is the traditional 12 step just tells you what needs to be accomplished without telling you how the heck to do it. There's no strategies. It's missing strategies. Leap of courage is all strategies. You have an self-crafted kings. Boy, do I have something for you, and it's something for me too. Something that I am being massively humbled by, which is a good thing. This wonderful thing happens where every single time I've found myself to be judgmental towards a person or a thing, that eventually it comes back around to turning that judgment into non-judgment. Sometimes that's compassion for another person. Sometimes that means acceptance of a type of belief. There's many ways that can look like. So one of the things I'm really proud of is Leap of Courage is over 3 years old. And I never once, ever looked at a single addiction recovery program out there that exists on the planet, ever. For a couple of reasons. One, I had such a strong understanding that I knew I didn't need to go and look to see what else was out there to borrow it, right? And I didn't want to be influenced. I didn't want to be influenced by what those things were. And so I made it a very strong intention of mine to never look at a single other addiction recovery program out there. And 1 week and 1 day ago, I flew back here to my home in California. I was born and raised in Northern Illinois, was out there having a surprise retirement party for my dad. And it was a fun time. It was a fun time. But on the way back, I needed something to do on the airplane, right? And so what did I do? I decided to listen to one of the audiobooks that I've had on my Audible account for a while. I'll pull it up. I have it right here. It's called Recovery by Russell Brand. You guys know he's probably, maybe you've seen movies with him. He's a world famous actor. So he himself has overcome pornography addiction, other types of sex addiction, heroin, cocaine, you name it, like he's been there. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to see what Russell Brand has to say. I've had this in my phone for 6 months to listen to, and I listened to it on the plane. And I've never looked at, I didn't know that he was going to go into the 12 steps, traditional 12-step recovery programs. And I have intentionally not looked at those 12 steps for two reasons. One, I didn't want it to influence what I had going on over here. Because I wanted to just introduce something totally brand new and refreshing to the world without influence of what else is going on, of what other people are doing with their recovery programs. And so I love that. I love that I had the confidence to have that approach. And that confidence, I haven't always been confident. I had, the extreme opposite of that most of my life. But when you come to such an incredibly deep, deep understanding of something, you no longer need external validation to feel like good about what you know, right? And so that's where I was and continue to be, which is a great thing. And so they got to this point, and he's the narrator of his own book. I love if there's ever an author of a book and they voice narrate their own audiobook, it is amazing because you can really hear the emotion behind what they're saying. I totally recommend this book for anyone who's watching this right now. But he was going into the 12 steps. And I was like, oh no, am I gonna have to pause it? I have intentionally not looked at it. I don't want to be influenced. I was like, you know what, Jessica, it's been over 3 years. Leap of Courage is pretty solid, pretty set. It's okay. And so I allowed it to come in. And I'm gonna backtrack. One of the other reasons, there's two reasons why I didn't want to learn about the 12 steps. One was because of the reason I already said, not wanting outside influence and just wanting it to come purely from my experiential knowledge and intellectual knowledge that I gained and gathered outside of addiction recovery resources, just more on a deeper level of understanding how the brain works in our neurology and creating and pruning back new, neural pathways and the limbic system and the parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve, all that stuff. So, well, maybe you don't know about it yet because you'll learn about it in the course as you go. But when I first read step number 1 of the 12-step program, it made me furious because it forces a person to admit to something that's not true. which is, I believe, the reason why so many people have trouble getting past step one. Step one, here, I'll read it to you. I admit I am powerless over the addiction and that my life is unmanageable. Admitting that you're powerless is the single most disempowering thing that a person can ever do, right? And so I didn't want to read any further. I didn't want to, that made me angry of like, admit you're powerless. No, you need to learn how powerful you actually are so you can overcome this. You have the blinders on, so you're not able to see how powerful you really are. Once you do see it, you step into that power and you act on it. So what I've done here is 1 week and 1 day ago, I listened to all 12 steps. And as I listened to them, I was in airplane mode on the airplane, but you can still text yourself, but then when you take it off airplane mode, it sends you the messages. So I was texting myself. I would listen to step one. I would text myself a revised, upgraded, more self-empowering version of step one. And then I would, because it was on my phone, I was listening. And then I would press play, listen to step two. And I'd be like, oh. And then I would text myself a newly revised, upgraded, new empowering version of step two. And I did this all throughout the entire 12 steps. Most of them I changed and altered. A couple I left the same. And I'm going to go over what those are with you, and you get to see what those are. So Leap of Courage was not designed from a place of being a 12-step program, but this is the part that blew my mind and what was massively humbling to me. So actually, hold that. I'm going to get back to that in a sec. The other thing that makes it really difficult for some people to go through the 12 steps is it's made only for people who believe in a higher power, God or the divine or some higher power that you have a spiritual connection to, right? And so when an atheist who's addicted to something and wants to overcome addiction and wants to do the 12-step program, step two says, I came to believe in a power greater than me that could restore my sanity. And step three is, I made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as I understand him. And so this is not inclusive of everyone who wants to overcome addiction. So what I did is I converted each one over so that even if someone is an atheist, agnostic, or a very devout religious person of any religion that exists in the world whatsoever, everyone fits into one of those categories, right? And so it's all inclusive. It's all inclusive and conceptually makes it significantly easier to adopt these steps. So the things that I've converted over is to switch from admitting that you're powerless, which is a false thing to admit to in the first place, into admitting you have not yet realized how to access your power. What a difference, huh? The other thing is I converted it over so that it doesn't matter what you believe in this world, atheist, deep spiritual connection with God, wherever you lie, I converted it over so that it is all inclusive, no matter where you are, no matter where you are with that. And I made a couple other little changes. You'll see as we go over them. But the thing that humbled me massively was I was so totally judgmental towards the entire 12-step program simply because I could not get past steps 1 or 2. But when I looked at it holistically, here's the interesting thing. It's almost identical to Leap of Courage as far as what must be accomplished, with the changes where it's more empowering and you don't necessarily have to believe in a higher power outside of yourself. But the biggest difference, and so those are what has to be done, right? But the biggest difference between a 12-step program and Leap of Courage is, and I've gotten this feedback from men in this program who have gone through 12-step programs. And the biggest difference is the traditional 12-step just tells you what needs to be accomplished without telling you how the heck to do it. There's no strategies. It's missing strategies. And so Leap of Courage is all strategies. You have an intellectual understanding of what's going on, plus the strategy on how to address it. That gives you a result. The 12 steps it doesn't necessarily give you the strategies on this. So let me go through and show you the differences here. I'm reading off of a downloadable PDF that you have access to here in this lesson. You can click it and download it, print it out, or whatever. So instead of calling it the 12 steps, I'm calling it the all-inclusive 12 shifts. The all-inclusive because, it can include anyone, no matter what your beliefs are, but the 12 shifts. The reason why I don't like to call it a step is because step indicates that it must be sequential. You must complete this step before you can get this step, as if you're going up a flight of stairs, right? You can't do step number 7 and then do step number 3 as you're going up a flight of stairs. It just doesn't work that way. But think of this more as maybe a pie chart with 12 slices, and you can work on many of them or all of them simultaneously. And each one, it's not an either I've accomplished it or I haven't. They all take place on a spectrum. To what intensity or to what degree have you been doing this shift in your life? And so think about it as that. You can shift stronger on the spectrum as you go along. And so step 1 of the traditional is I admit I am powerless over the addiction and that my life is unmanageable. So step 1 or shift number 1 in the newly upgraded version is I admit that I have not yet learned how to access my higher self. And when I do, I will have control over my life, behaviors, choices, reactions, and goals. But there's something in here, higher self. We must define specifically what higher self means. Okay, so I differentiate higher self from being stuck in survival mode. So stuck in survival mode, that's driven by fear, driven by selfishness, chasing pleasure as an attempt to not suffer, but we know it creates more suffering. Low self-awareness, seeks distraction from self. And when you seek distraction from self, prevents you from having self-awareness. Being a people pleaser, or manipulates, controls, and takes advantage of other people. Dishonest with self and others, harsh judgment of self and others, holds grudges, has shame, lacks bravery to look inward and self-correct, lacks self-empowerment, self-victimization, uses limiting beliefs to perpetuate suffering. Something always feels missing or empty. Experiencing addiction, depression, codependency, self-isolation, narcissism, apathy, or using others to validate your self-worth. Now, using others to validate your self-worth, that always means a subconscious low self-worth, and using other people's reactions of you, whether it's from an accomplishment or a joke you told or whatever it might be, in order to their reaction to use that to feel like a worthy human being. So higher self is living by self-compassion, massive self-awareness and self-correction, craving deep connection with others, being brave enough to step into vulnerability, forgives self and others, setting healthy boundaries, and knowing yourself well enough to know what these boundaries look like, has regular alone time for introspection without distraction. Well, so that's without distraction from self, right? So going on walks, meditation, prayer, journaling, etc. Has a solid meditation, mindfulness, breathwork, yoga, or prayer practice. Let's call this the higher self practice, because this is the most effective way to access your higher self. Courageous and honest with yourself and others, compelled to be of service to others in a way that is deeply satisfying to you. For me, that's leap of courage, and you're going to find what that is for you, and maybe you already know what that is. Has a solid knowing that self-awareness and the journey for self-improvement is a never-ending one, and welcomes this fact with open arms. Experiences deep joy and satisfaction. Okay, so now that we've just defined higher self and differentiated it from, I don't want to use the term lower self, but rather living in survival mode. Living in survival mode is a protection mechanism. It's a coping mechanism for when we don't know how yet to live in a better way, to think in a better way, to make choices, or to respond to things in a better way. And by better, I mean more loving and compassionate and healthy to yourself and those around you. So going back to step number 1, or shift 1, the new one is, shift number 1 is, now that we know the definition of higher self, I admit that I have not yet learned how to access my higher self. And when I do, I will have control over my life behaviors, choices, reactions, and goals. And you can add intentions in there as well. And so Leap of Courage teaches you how to access your higher self. Leap of Courage teaches you how to access your higher self. When that happens, all addictions melt away. It just happens. Trauma goes away, PTSD, porn addiction, any addiction, it goes away. When you learn how to access your higher self, watch what happens in your life. So let's go on. Number 2, the traditional 12 step is I came to believe in a power greater than me that could restore my sanity. And Leap of Courage upgraded version is I came to realize that unlocking the greater power within me by accessing my higher self, I will restore my sanity. Now, you'll notice that some of these have in parentheses, it's white. So I have it typed out in yellow, but the all-inclusive 12 shifts are in yellow. And in parentheses, there's white. The parentheses is for any of you who believe in God or the divine or have a spiritual connection with anything greater than yourself. For some of you, that might be nature. For some of you, that might be your subconscious mind. So if you want to take a look at the white in parentheses, you can. And if you have a belief in a higher power greater than yourself, then the white in the parentheses is absolutely for you. And so that makes it all inclusive. If you are an atheist, then you can ignore the white in parentheses and you can take a look and read it anyway, and perhaps even just reading it. And here's the thing, here's a little trick if you want to know this. Even just pretending that what's white in parentheses is real will help you. We know this to be true in neuroscience. There's a book called The Awakened Brain by Lisa Miller, and it's all about the neuroscience of spirituality. So if you're an atheist, even if you pretend to believe that what's in white in those parentheses is true, it's going to make this journey easier for you just by pretending that it's true. So that's a little subconscious neuro hack for you. Let's go on to number 3. So the traditional one is I made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as I understand him. The Leap of Courage upgraded shift, number 3, is I made a decision to turn my care over to my higher self, the kind, brave, loving, compassionate version of me. And then white in parentheses, and allow myself to feel the divine love as to be supported through this journey. Number 4, the traditional one. I searched and made a fearless moral inventory of myself. The Leap of Courage converted version. I searched inward and made a comprehensive inventory of myself, which includes massive self-awareness and limiting beliefs. And so I removed the word fearless and moral because it's okay to have fear as you're searching inward. And in fact, that's what makes you brave as you do this. The fear is almost always there. So you don't have to make a fearless inventory. You just have to make sure that you do it. But the more you learn to trust in yourself, the fear will dissipate. And it's okay. It's totally okay if there's fear associated with learning things about yourself. Universally, that's what almost everyone experiences. And it can be scary at times, and that's okay because we know how to work with that. Here in Leap of Courage, you're learning how to work with your new self-awarenesses so that they don't overwhelm and burden or control you. And then I also removed the word moral because that is so subjective. And I replaced it with just a comprehensive inventory of yourself. So you search inward and make a comprehensive inventory of yourself, and you have massive self-awareness. So let's move on to number 5. The traditional 12-step is I admit to God, to myself, and to another human being the exact nature of my wrongdoings / shortcomings. In the Leap of Courage upgraded version, my higher self courageously speaks fully to at least one other person of the exact nature of my past harmful decisions because I am self-aware and brave. And then white in parentheses, if you believe in God or higher power. And I admit this to the divine, The divine sees my bravery. So I removed the word wrongdoings and shortcomings and I just replaced it with past harmful decisions. Past harmful decisions. Because those past harmful decisions, they serve a solid and strong purpose in your life that you can gain really important life lessons from. And you needed to make those decisions, perhaps, in order to get the new wisdom and awareness that you now have or will be having as you go on this journey. So instead of calling it wrong or wrongdoings, let's say that it's a good thing that showed up in your life in order for you to get the lessons that you really need. So I'm just calling it past harmful decisions and switching it like that. So moving on to number 6, the traditional 12-step program says, I am entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. And the Leap of Courage upgraded version, more self-empowering version, is I am entirely ready to allow the wisdom, safety, and compassion of my higher self to heal my emotions, behaviors, and intentions, because those old ways have already given me the life lessons I needed from them. So it's time to let them go now. And then white in parentheses, if you believe in a higher power, and to allow the divine to support me by allowing me to love myself through this process. All right, moving on to number 7. The traditional 12-step says, I humbly ask God to remove my shortcomings. And the more self-empowering Leap of Courage version for number 7 is, I humbly call upon my higher self to take over so that I replace harmful choices with loving and compassionate choices. And I know my higher self is always 100% available for this task. Number 8, I made a list of all the people who I have harmed, and I am willing to make amends with all of them. And the version I added over here in Leap of Courage is, I made a list of all the people who I have physically or emotionally harmed, and I am willing to make amends with all of them. I just added a little bit of specificity in there with adding physically and emotionally harmed. All right, number 9. The traditional 12-step says, I have made amends with all of them where possible, unless doing so would bring them harm. Number 9 for Leap of Courage here is basically identical. I have made amends with all of them where possible, unless doing so would bring harm to anyone. Number 10 of the traditional 12-step is, I continue to take personal inventory, and when I am wrong, I promptly admit to it. And the Leap of Courage upgraded version is, I continue to have self-awareness and promptly admit to myself or others and make corrections when I am wrong. And so the biggest difference in here is the corrective action. So number 10 in the traditional just says to promptly admit it, but it doesn't specify to make the correction. It just says, I admit where I was wrong, but in there it doesn't say to make the correction. So I added in here, and to make corrections when I am wrong. So taking corrective action, that's the biggest difference here. Number 11, traditional 12-step says, I sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God and as I understand him, praying only for knowledge of his will and for the power to carry that out. So that one is essentially taking, a person who will go by that one says, it is God's responsibility to remove these things from me, and I surrender to that experience. But let's switch it to a version that I believe is significantly more self-empowering, whether you believe in God or not. And so number 11, the Leap of Courage version, the number 11 shift is, I continue to have a higher self practice. Remember, the higher self practice was either having prayer, meditation, the breath work, yoga. These are different things that affect your subconscious mind and your neurology and your parasympathetic nervous system, basically in ways that allow you to continue to have access to your higher self. And so number 11, I continue to have a higher self practice to stay fully connected with my higher self so that I can stay on this path of righteousness and freedom that I have chosen. And then in parentheses in white, if you believe in a higher power outside of yourself, and use prayer to connect with the divine so I feel fully supported and in staying with my higher self. Now, it doesn't have to be prayer, because I know many people who have a spiritual practice without using prayer whatsoever. For some people, it's through meditation. For some people, it's through deep and intense breathwork journeys that you'll have the opportunity to go through here in this program. For some people, it's yoga. There's all sorts of ways that this can look like for a person. So it doesn't have to be prayer. Just know that you're not limited with those things. All right, number 12. So the traditional 12 step is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. I try to carry this message to other addicts and practice these principles in all these affairs. So to me, that sounds really limiting, and I'll tell you why. So number 12, the Leap of Courage version that I switched it over to, is I have awakened my higher self as a result of being brave enough to be committed to this journey. And as a result, I am naturally compelled to be in service to others in a way that is in alignment with my higher self. And then in parentheses, and perhaps it was a spiritual awakening that my higher self has experienced. And so the whole being in service to others, for me, that's naturally a leap of courage, right? And I've spoken to so many of you, and so many of you already at the beginning of this journey know specifically in what ways you want to serve others. And for some of you, it is with addiction recovery. But for many, and I would even say most of you, it's outside of addiction recovery. And so the traditional 12 step says that you must be of service to others, specifically with addiction recovery. That is massively limiting to you. If you want to be of service to others in a totally different way, then do that totally other different way. Maybe you have a soft spot in your heart for old people and you want to work at a retirement home, and that's your way of being of service. Maybe you love music and you're a musician and you love knowing the people's emotional responses that they get to the music, the beautiful music that you make. There's so many ways to be of service in this world. And so don't limit yourself to the 12 steps that says, the traditional 12 steps that said you must be of service to others in this world, specifically in overcoming addiction. Let it be whatever is, you can call it your calling, your purpose, your passion, your mission, whatever label you want to slap on there, it doesn't matter. But when a person is totally recovered, even when we're not even totally recovered, but the more recovered we are, the natural part of us that wants to serve others comes out stronger and stronger. And the more recovered a person is, the easier it is to show up and be there for another person or a group of people or whoever it might be, whether it's a specific in the moment when you're being empathetically compassionate with an individual, or you're setting up your life mission to do something for people, whatever that might be, right? For me, that natural calling was leap of courage. It just, it was my effortless calling. It just happened. And some of you already know what that's going to look like. Some of you have no idea what that's going to look like, right? And it can happen in so many different ways, so many different ways. Even just showing up with kindness and compassion and empathy for other people in everyone you come across. That is probably one of the best ways to be of service in this world, is the way that you treat other people, the way that you show up in this world. Your identity is going to influence everyone who you come across. Will that influence be of service to others, or is it going to be harmful to others or indifferent? So think of this. Now, some of you have been a part of 12-step programs. Some of you are in them right now. Some of you have no idea what it's like. For some of you, this is the first time ever hearing the 12 steps. I am totally in a place for feedback about this. This is just where these shifts felt totally natural to me and totally significantly more empowering from the traditional 12 step. And so this is where I was humbled, where it was like, wow, Leap of Courage is almost identical to a 12 step program, minus, the shifts that I told you about. And I teach you how to make it happen. But actually, I wrote these things down. So, shift number 4, you could call step number 4, is in Leap of Courage. It's all about self-awareness and learning your limiting beliefs. At the time of this recording, level number 2 is essentially devoted to step number 4. Step number 5, you get that in the group Zooms, the Telegram app, the one-on-ones. Step number 6, you get that when you choose to engage and surrender to the action steps I've provided for you. Step number 8 and 9, that's in Leap of Courage. I have the 5 steps to an authentic apology. That's included in here. Shift number 10, pattern interrupts, and a few other things as well. Step number 11 is just built in as a critical part of this program. Step number 12, being of service. For me, that's self-crafted king. Creating self-crafted king in Leap of Courage is my way of being of service, and it feels really amazing. And so all of the other numbers I didn't list, when you step into your higher self, when you learn how to access your higher self as defined earlier, it automatically covers all of them. 1 through 12 happens automatically when you step into your higher self. Leap of Courage teaches you how to step into your higher self. So I would love your feedback on this. I am really excited about this. It's one of my new ideas. I finally opened myself up to take a peek at other addiction recovery programs that exist on the planet, in this world. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being influenced and that it was coming really from my genuine self. And so this has humbled me. And because I was so judgmental about the 12 steps, and there's so much of it, which basically is Leap of Courage, but in this upgraded way that I told you about it. And I highly recommend that book by Russell Brand. Also this book by Lisa Miller, The Awakened Brain, if you want to learn more about the neuroscience of spirituality. It's pretty awesome. So I encourage you to print out the PDF I have attached that shows the definition between higher self and all the steps, or shifts, if you will, and take a look at them. Study it, and ask yourself, where on here am I struggling the most? Where are my strengths on here, and where could I be stronger? Where are my strengths and where could I be stronger? Where do I need to make the most shifts take place? So that's what I have for you. Oh, I want to show you something funny. Totally irrelevant. We all were wearing mustaches. These are sticker mustaches. At my dad's retirement party. So there are about 17 of us wearing these fuzzy stick-on mustaches because my dad has one. So a little reminder of my family. So there we go. Go step into your higher self. Rock it.